Hey, good evening, everybody. We are so thankful you've tuned in again for another Bible class. We're in Ted's office tonight and thankful for your participation and your encouragement, and look forward to studying with you again this evening. Even though we're away from each other, we're together through our study.
Yeah, I wanted to talk for just a moment, Ryan, about our elders met Monday. They maintained a social distance, but accomplished a lot. And one of the things that was decided was that our gospel meeting, which comes up at the end of April, had to be canceled. I know some of you are concerned about the gospel meeting, but we've waited 12 years for this gospel meeting with Glenn Colley, but Brother Colley certainly understood, and so it has been canceled.
Also, want to make you aware of one church-related, family-related announcement. As you know, of course, Roy Brooks is away from us, but his daughter Kay, her husband Gary Frost is his name, passed away this past week, and it's a sad situation. They're not able to attend the funeral because of the social distancing. But we're going to have Kay's address in the bulletin that we plan to mail out Saturday or email out Saturday. And if you could drop her a line, she could really use the encouragement, and I think that would be a good thing to do. Tonight we want to talk to you about being emotionally aware, and this is not just I guess aware of our own emotions, but aware of everyone, really. Sort of the idea of being present in one another's lives, being connected with one another, even though we're apart, and making sure that we're taking care of our emotional health, and I think looking out for the emotional health of others. Because the isolation from one another is difficult at this time.
Yes, if you recall, on March the 16th of this year, President Donald Trump presented some coronavirus guidelines for America in a document called 15 Days to Slow the Spread. Some of you received the card that he's holding up. I think it was a box holder that went to almost every home in the nation. In the president's guidelines, Americans were directed to avoid social gatherings in groups of 10 or more. And according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, there has been a social distancing law on the books since 2006, actually. And so this was a way to prevent, hopefully, the virus from spreading. Citizens were urged to be no closer than 6 feet from another person to prevent the spread of the virus. And if you'll notice, Ryan and I are separated by at least 6 feet. This is causing a lot of loneliness, a lot of isolation. I was talking with Karen last night, and we were talking about those of you who live alone. We know that this is a very tough time for you. In fact, one of our members who lives alone put this on Facebook the other day, and I don't want to embarrass this person, but this person wrote, "The only people I have to talk to is Jesus and my dog." And so we're aware of the separation right now, but I want us to look at a passage of Scripture and think about it, and see that social distancing sometimes was even practiced in New Testament times, but people stayed together and tried to be emotionally present, even though they were distanced in physical space.
Mm-hmm. Sure, and it's interesting. One of the things with this virus originating somewhere else and sort of moving across the globe, we're sort of able to watch as I guess other countries handle this or mishandle it. And this image here on March 18th, some neighbors surprised an 80-year-old lady by singing "Happy Birthday" to her from the window. They obviously couldn't have a birthday party for her, presume that she is alone. And this is in Spain during their enforced quarantine period. And you think about how sad that is. But if we take a positive spin on it, it's encouraging to know that people are at least trying to continue to maintain contact with one another. The problem is that individuals who are isolated from others are already isolated, and so they miss that extra connection that oftentimes they get to have, going out to eat with one another, or even going to Walmart, or certainly worship services. And the fact of the matter remains that humans are by nature social beings, whether you're an extrovert or an introvert. Extroverts have a tendency to want to be around lots and lots of people all the time. Introverts still are social. Their social circle is just a little bit smaller. And so whether you're an extrovert or an introvert, this is probably affecting you. Think about the isolation and loneliness that would have been experienced by the lepers. You contract this disease and you have to be taken away from your family, your hometown, and you just have to be put into another situation. This is an awful situation. Leprosy forced a victim into seclusion, away from society and from all the comforts of life. And I mean, you can see it not only forced them away socially, but disfigured them. This is a picture of a man with leprosy, and obviously an awful disease, a terrible sickness, and it was very likely that lepers had been, I guess, a source of fear and anxiety from others. When you saw a leper, if you had your children with you, you instinctively pull them away, trying to keep them away from this disease. And really, I guess, as long as this disease has been present, it's sort of been that stigma.
And Ron, if you recall, we had to search a long time to find a picture of a leper that would be appropriate for us to use in this Bible class, because some of them were so offensive, we thought that it would scare the children. But let's turn in our Bibles to Matthew chapter 8. And I want to start with verse 1. We'll go through Matthew 8, verses 1 through 4. But let's start with verse 1. When Jesus came down from the mountain, large crowds followed him. Now I want you to think about this. There were large crowds. You see, Jesus' popularity meant that he attracted a crowd wherever he traveled. I told the teens this in a Bible class a few weeks ago, and that Jesus was a celebrity. Mm-hmm. And we may not think of that, but he was a celebrity. And when Jesus came down from the mountaintop, there were people there waiting on him. And great crowds followed Jesus from Galilee, the Decapolis, Jerusalem, Judea, from beyond the Jordan. And later we're going to see people come as far as Tyre and Sidon. They'd have to travel 11 days to just get to see Jesus. And so by this time, Jesus is no longer able to even enter a town. He had to teach in desolate places. And still people were coming to him to hear him speak. So Jesus is a celebrity. Wherever he goes, great crowds gather. Now the problem is, where there's a great crowd, you can't practice social distancing.
Look at Matthew chapter 8 and verse 2 now. A leper came to him, and remember, in this crowd, a leper comes to him, bowed down before him, and said, "Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean." Now, this leper coming to Jesus, kneeling before him, basically pronouncing faith in his ability, saying, if you will, you can make me clean. It's almost certain that his sort of navigating through the crowd probably created a wide dearth and people scattered, as you can imagine. And it's fascinating, I guess, in my mind. I think about, if I were in the place of Jesus, I would probably instinctively say, you can stop right there. We can do this from a distance. You don't have to come any closer. Again, leprosy it's an infectious disease. It's very contagious. It results in these dry, thick scabs, circumference of about an inch all over the body. And the man's body would have been thoroughly infected with the disease, and in its worst form. and it was considered actually dangerous to touch them because of the it being so contagious.
Yes, I can imagine, Ryan, when this leper entered this huge crowd, there was social distancing.
Yeah.
Because remember, you were supposed to stay 10 feet from a leper.
Mm-hmm.
So even then, they knew about social distancing.
Yeah.
So, by the end of this text, I believe Jesus and the leper are alone
Mm-hmm.
because the crowd spreads. But notice this leper came to Jesus. He was kneeling down before him, stating that if the Lord was willing, and he could heal him. Now, here's the thing about it, Ryan. We both know that Jesus could have healed him without touching him.
Mm-hmm.
But the leper was unclean. In fact, anyone who touched him became unclean. So this was a dangerous thing. It would be like going up and hugging someone, maybe even kissing them that had COVID-19. And so this was a social distancing issue. Now, I can imagine the crowd, like you said, separated. Mm-hmm. And imagine for a moment that you're in that crowd and you see this leper coming to Jesus. First of all, you would know that he is a threat to your personal health. And as Ryan mentioned, the health of your children. You see, they saw a man breaking both the law of Moses and social standards. He was not doing what he was supposed to do. And the leper was the kind of person that would cause little children to hide behind their mothers and peek around, and some would dare to peek around, and some would be so frightened by just the sight of the leper. But the thing about it is not just the children here that are afraid. Everyone is afraid to touch the leper or to be in his presence. Now let's notice two passages from Leviticus. Leviticus 13, verse 45, Leviticus 13, verse 46, the very next verse. As for the leper who has the infection, his clothes shall be torn, the hair of his head shall be uncovered, he shall cover his mustache and cry, unclean, unclean. He shall remain unclean all the days during which he has the infection. He is unclean, he shall live alone. His dwelling shall be outside the camp.
Picture what's going on here. This is not just social isolation. This is, a situation where you're wearing dirty clothes, they're ragged, you don't have a means really by which to support yourself. So you're probably going to be re-wearing the same clothes. They're going to be dirty, your hair's going to be long and ragged. You have to even appear this way as sort of a visual alarm to say from a distance that person is unclean. Besides the fact that they're yelling this, you're going to be able to see this situation. Physically alone, emotionally alone, and yet in the midst of this, there's this leper who has this really a great moment of faith. He believes that Jesus can heal him, and his issue is not whether or not Jesus can do it, it's whether or not someone like Jesus, someone so powerful and famous, would be willing to put himself at risk and do this. And you have to ask the question, why would a famous person like Jesus pay attention to this social outcast?
Now let's move into verse 3. Matthew chapter 8 and verse 3. Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him and said, I am willing, be cleansed. And immediately the leprosy left him. Now, Jesus did the unthinkable. He touched a person with leprosy. Now, by the way, Jesus could have healed him without touching him. You remember that Jesus healed the centurion's servant by just speaking the words and not even touching. He didn't even go to the house. He just spoke the words. Notice especially Matthew chapter 8 and verse 8. It seems that Jesus touched the leper for a reason. Now, right now, we can't be together. we can be together with our family members that we live with, but we have to maintain a social distance. I am not recommending go to Walmart and hug all the people that come in. I'm not recommending that. But touch, once we are able to get back together, I've noticed a lot of people were posting Sunday during the worship online. I miss the hugs. I miss the handshakes. I miss the people. And Ryan, I know you don't miss the hugs.
No.
But there are people who are isolated, who are living by themselves, who miss the social contact. This is a powerful story to me, but there's some power in touching someone appropriately. Research shows, for example, that babies who are not held, cuddled, embraced enough can stop growing. If the condition continues, some babies even die. This is a picture of babies in Romania, and this is where this first became aware. People became aware of this. I've known teenagers who were not cuddled and held as babies, and they had to go through some training because of separation disorders. And so I wanted to relate something, Ryan, that happened when I was in graduate school in counselor training. A student in the training with the class, we were in group therapy class, and this student started telling us about this terrible thing that happened in his past. And he started crying. And we had been trained just in that previous semester, we had been trained that when a person is weeping like that during a counseling session, let them weep until they stop. And when they stop, then you touch them. You comfort them. But you don't touch them until they stop crying. Now, this doesn't apply to parents with children and other family members. But, you know, when you're comforting a stranger, you wait till they get through crying, and then you touch them to reassure them. Now, this man knew that. But when he got through crying, he rebuked us all for not touching him. He said, you know, I was crying, and each one of you knew that I was upset, but no one touched me to comfort me. So I think one of the things that people are missing right now is the touch. And I'm not recommending that we go out and touch people. I'm just saying, when this clears, we have a lot of hugs to make up, some of us.
Yeah.
But we also, right now, need to be emotionally aware of those who live alone, those who are really struggling with what's going on in our world.
Yeah. You know, again, back to the leper, you think about how he was living, and I mean, he had suffered physically, you know, emotionally, psychologically, socially, and probably even spiritually, especially, you know, we're still under the law of Moses at this time. And one of the big parts of the law of Moses is the assembly, is the congregation of Israel, the people of Israel coming together. And he's an outcast. He has to be outside the camp and those types of things according to the law. And for too long, he had been basically considered a monster. Hands off, stay away, you know, distance from him, running from him, children calling him names. He needed this comfort, but could receive no physical comfort, even if he had emotional support of some sort. The comforting arm of someone saying it's going to be okay, or we care about you, we love you. That just wasn't possible. So when Jesus allows the leper to come to him, and he touches him, he brings back this man's humanity. He's socially aware of the leper and his needs, and rather than just running away or drawing back, that's probably, again, I've already mentioned this, but that would definitely be my reaction, is to just sort of take a few steps back. He draws him in. He crosses this distance, this barrier, and touches him. And I think, probably this is the first time this man had been touched in many years. And for the first time, he felt again, probably felt human. He's not only healed of his disease, but he's welcomed back into society. And that's, I don't think we can understate this point. That, yes, the disease is terrible and horrible, but maybe it was this social side that was even more horrible. In fact, I guess we can't do this, but I think if we were able to interview a leper and say, if you had to continue with this disease, the pain and the discomfort, but could be in society, would you do it? And I would venture to say they would all say absolutely. Because it was the isolation that was so difficult, that they missed the people. Jesus essentially commuted a death sentence for the former leper. He could now return home, hug his wife, his children, be back in society. He could bathe and put on new clothes, get a haircut, and sleep in a regular bed again.
Yeah, Ryan, we still have leper colonies today in the United States. In fact, there was one off the coast of Georgia on a little island. If I'm not mistaken, there's one between Louisiana and Mississippi in the Gulf of Mexico, even now. And so leprosy is still, it's not called that now, but it's still a terrible disease. Let's move on to Matthew chapter 8 and verse 4. And Jesus said to him, "See that you tell no one, but go to show yourself to the priest and present the offering that Moses commanded as a testimony to them." So Jesus asked the man cleansed of leprosy to do two things. First, he asked him to go show himself to the priest, follow the purification ceremony that would prove to everyone that he had been cleansed of leprosy. You see, Jesus had not yet fulfilled the law of Moses, so the law was still in effect, as Ryan mentioned earlier. So Jesus did what was right. He followed the law. So that was very important.
What's interesting is the truth of the miracle. I mean, the presence of this miracle needs to be told to other people. They need to know that this has happened. If for no other reason, obviously to give glory to God, but so that this man can properly re-enter society. But Jesus tells the former leper not to tell anyone about what had happened to cure him of this leprosy. And scholars call this the messianic secret. Jesus had a preferred timeline of when he would reveal himself as the Son of Man to the larger community. And you see this often where he commands people not to talk about this. Specifically in Mark's gospel, this theme recurs over and over, where he'll perform a miracle or do something incredible and say, "Now don't tell anyone about this." And so many times we hear them running immediately and saying, "Hey, listen to what this guy did." Because of this, Jesus, after his ministry gained steam and he started to have some notoriety, he couldn't go into the towns. He couldn't go into the large areas. And because of his notoriety, and it wasn't yet time to fully reveal himself. Yet the man tells everyone, like we said, that he saw what Jesus had done for him. And you can read about that in Mark and Luke's accounts of this as well. But before Jesus wanted his identity revealed, people just naturally wanted to tell it. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. They were told not to tell it, and did it anyway. And now here we are, a couple thousand years later, we're allowed to tell it, and we struggle to cross that barrier and share the gospel with others.
So we can reach out to others socially who have distanced themselves. I'm not talking about physically. I'm talking about those even before COVID-19 who were isolating themselves and had withdrawn. You see, we can be humanly present in the lives of those who are isolated and lonely. So I want us to look around, think through our congregation, our community, our areas, those that you know who are isolated. Who do you see that they're withdrawn, they're quiet, they're socially isolated. They're loners, but not always by choice. So we can't heal people by touching them like Jesus could. However, we can touch people's lives by building relationships with them. And if you love Jesus, and I know all of you do, be emotionally present in people's lives. People need to feel a connection that reminds listeners and everyone that somebody cares, that somebody loves them. During this time when we cannot assemble and be together, it's especially important for us to reach out to others who feel, quite frankly, like lepers. It's interesting to me, Ryan, at the beginning of Matthew chapter 8, in verse 1, huge crowds are there. But by the end of Matthew chapter 8 and verse 4, it appears to me it's Jesus and the leper. So people probably ran. They wanted to hear Jesus, but not at the risk of catching leprosy. I want to close by reading from Matthew chapter 25 and verse 40. It's a picture of the judgment. The king will answer and say to them, "Truly I say to you, to the extent that you did it to one of these brothers of mine, even the least of them, you did it to me."